The Varek Empire had a tradition. Every conquered species learned it the same way. Not from books, not from diplomats, not from the carefully worded surrender treaties that Seravin's legal council drafted in 4 languages. They learned it from the throne room, from the banners hanging in rows so long you couldn't see where they ended, from the silence that pressed against your chest like a physical weight, from the queen herself, who sat on a throne carved from the hull of the first ship she'd ever destroyed and looked at you like you were already a banner on her wall. She just hadn't hung you yet. Seravin had ruled the Varek Empire for 312 years. In that time, she had conquered 89 civilizations, negotiated the terms of 43 voluntary surrenders, and personally ended the careers of 6 of her own generals who mistook her patience for weakness. She had never lost a battle. She had never spared a prisoner who didn't serve a strategic purpose. She had never, in 312 years, encountered anything that genuinely surprised her. She was about to encounter one. The human was brought in at the 3rd hour of the morning cycle, when the throne room's bioluminescent panels cast everything in deep blue-gold light that made shadows look like they had weight. Seravin had specifically chosen this hour for prisoner audiences. The light was disorienting to most species. The hour was exhausting. The combination tended to accelerate the breaking process. She didn't look up when the doors opened. She was reviewing the annexation timeline for the Pelion system, 3 months ahead of schedule, which meant her logistics commander deserved a commendation, and her intelligence division deserved a reprimand for underestimating Pelion resistance capacity. She made both notes with the precise economy of someone who had been making command decisions longer than most civilizations had existed, and let the silence do its work. 30 seconds, 60, 90. She looked up. The human was standing, not kneeling, not prostrating, not arranged in the submissive forward lean that her guards typically achieved through applied pressure by the time a prisoner reached her throne. Standing. Hands bound behind his back, armor stripped to a gray underlayer, a cut above his left eye that had dried dark, one boot slightly torn at the sole. Standing the way someone stands when they're waiting, and they've decided the wait doesn't bother them. He was looking directly at her. That was the second thing. Most species, found the floor intensely interesting by this point. The Kalari ambassador had discovered something fascinating about the 3rd tile from the left within 8 seconds of entering. An entire Draven military delegation had maintained collective eye contact with their own feet for a 20-minute audience. Looking at Seravin directly, without flinching, without the rapid eye movement that indicated nervous recalculation, was something that happened rarely enough that she'd started noting it in her records as a behavioral anomaly. She set down her data pad. "You were told to kneel him," she said to Veth, her guard commander, without breaking eye contact with the human. "We attempted it, Majesty." Veth had a particular tone for operational reports that didn't go as planned. He was using it now. Twice in processing. Once at the entrance corridor. And? A pause that contained significant information. He stood back up. Seravin looked at the human. The human looked at Seravin. The throne room held its silence like it always did, waiting to see what got broken. "What's your name?" she asked. She spoke in Varek standard. Her translators would handle the conversion. "Darren Cole," the human said. His voice was even. Not performing bravery. She knew what performed bravery sounded like. The slightly too loud steadiness of someone desperately maintaining a facade. This was different. This was just a man answering a question. Staff Sergeant. Human Coalition Armed Forces. Service number 774 Kilo. You're giving me your military identification. You asked for my name. That's the complete answer. Seravin was quiet for a moment. In 312 years, no prisoner had ever given her a complete answer to a simple question and made it feel like a mild correction. "You're the last survivor of your unit," she said. "I'm aware," Cole said. "Does that not affect you?" Something moved across his face. Not nothing. She caught it. A tightening around the eyes, a compression of the jaw that lasted less than a second before his expression returned to its neutral state. He'd felt it. He just hadn't let it out here, in front of her. "It affects me," he said. "I'm just not going to show you," Seravin stood. She descended the 3 steps from the throne platform and crossed the obsidian floor toward him. She was tall, even by Varek standards. Most species found her height alone enough to trigger the physical submission response. Cole watched her approach and made no movement at all, except to track her with his eyes. She stopped 2 meters away. The Varek had silver-gray skin that shifted tone with mood, luminescent undertones visible along the jaw and neck when emotions ran high. Her eyes were the pale gold of a dying star, vertical pupils, wide set, built for threat assessment at range. Her hair was white, not with age, but naturally, a genetic marker of the ruling line that made her instantly identifiable in any light. She was, by Varek aesthetic standards, exceptional. By the standards of conquered species, she was terrifying. Cole looked at her like she was a problem he was trying to work out. "You're not afraid," she said. "I didn't say that. You don't look it. Looking afraid doesn't help me." His eyes moved. Brief, professional, cataloging the room, the guards, the exits, the distance to various objects. She recognized the pattern. He was assessing. Not panicking, not freezing, assessing. "Does it change anything? Whether I'm afraid or not?" "No," Seravin said honestly. "Then it's not useful information to give you." She studied him for a long moment. He held her gaze without aggression, without submission, with the specific quality of someone who had made peace with their circumstances and was now operating purely in the present moment. In 312 years, she had broken 1,000 prisoners. She knew what breaking looked like at every stage. The initial defiance, the erosion, the moment the foundation cracked, the collapse. She looked at Darren Cole and felt, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely uncertain about which direction this was going. "Take him to the secure quarters," she said to Veth, turning back toward her throne. The upper level, not the cells. Veth's pause lasted exactly long enough to communicate surprise without crossing into insubordination. Majesty. "I'm not finished with him," Seravin said, and picked up her data pad, and did not think about the fact that in 312 years she had never said that about a prisoner before. She reviewed his file 3 times that night, not because the information changed, because she kept finding herself rereading sections, which was unusual. Seravin processed information efficiently. She read things once, retained them, moved on. Rereading was what she did when something wasn't adding up. Darren Cole, 31 years old by human reckoning, enlisted at 18, decorated for actions on 3 separate engagements. 1 decoration for extraction under fire. 1 for something classified that her analysts had flagged with a notation that said simply, "Whatever this was, people survived because of him." The 3rd was posthumous recognition for the members of his unit. His unit. The 11 people who died during capture. She read that section again. The field commander's report noted that Cole had been separated from his team during the initial engagement. By the time Varek forces reached his position, he'd taken down 4 soldiers and was working on a 5th. He'd kept fighting after it was clearly impossible. He'd stopped only when physically restrained by 6 soldiers simultaneously, and even then the report noted he'd required sedation. He hadn't fought to escape. There had been a window, a narrow one, where a soldier with his skill level could potentially have broken through the perimeter. He hadn't taken it. He'd stayed and fought in the direction of his team's last known position. He'd known they were dead. The timeline made it impossible that Cole hadn't known. He'd fought toward them anyway. Seravin set down the file. She understood soldiers who fought to survive. She understood soldiers who fought to complete objectives. She understood soldiers who fought out of rage or fear or training so deeply embedded it ran on instinct. She had encountered all of these and filed them in the appropriate categories. She did not have a category for fought towards certain death for people who were already gone. She went to see him at the 2nd hour. Cole was awake, sitting on the floor. Not the bed, the floor. Back against the wall, facing the door, hands bound and resting on his knees. He'd heard her coming through the ventilation shift. "You fought toward your team," she said. "After they were gone." Cole looked at her. Whatever he'd expected her to open with, that wasn't it. "Yes," he said. "Why?" A long pause, not calculating what to reveal, deciding how to explain something that required no explanation because to him it was simply true. "Because they were mine," he said finally. "You don't leave yours behind. Even when," he stopped. "You just don't. It wasn't tactically sound. No, it achieved nothing. No, then why? Because it wasn't about tactics." His voice was still even, but there was something underneath it now, something with weight. There are things you do because they're right, not because they work, not because they're smart, because they're right. And if you stop doing them, you lose something you can't get back. He looked at her steadily. "I don't expect that to make sense to you." "It doesn't," Seravin said. "I know." She moved to leave, then paused. "Sleep. I'll have food sent that's compatible with your biology. You know human dietary requirements? I know everything about every species I've conquered." She looked back at him. "I don't know everything about humans yet." She left. Kovath was waiting in the command corridor when she returned. He was her senior general, 60 years in that position, a Varek who had fought beside her father before he fought beside her, and he had a particular way of standing when he disapproved of something. Perfectly correct posture, perfectly controlled expression, and a silence that communicated volumes about what he wasn't saying yet. "Majesty," he said. "Kovath," she said, and kept walking. He fell into step beside her. "The prisoner's file has been flagged by 3 department heads. I know. Standard processing would have begun today. I know that too." She stopped at the command deck entrance and looked at him. Kovath had survived 300 years of her reign by being useful and by knowing, precisely and always, exactly where the line was. Right now he was standing at it. "File your concerns through the council if you feel it's necessary, General." "Not yet," he said. "I'm giving you the opportunity to explain yourself first." It was either the most respectful thing he could have said or the most presumptuous. With Kovath, the difference was always a matter of timing. "Good night, General," she said, and went inside. Behind her, she heard him not move for a long moment before his footsteps finally receded. In the command deck, alone, Seravin made a decision she would later identify as the precise moment everything changed. She was not going to break Darren Cole. She was going to figure out what made him work. On the 3rd night, she found him different. She came at the 2nd hour as she had the previous 2 nights, moving through the ventilation-shifted corridor, and when the door opened, he didn't speak immediately. That was the first thing. He was sitting in the same position. Floor, back to wall, facing the door. But the room was dark. She hadn't turned the lights off from outside. He'd done it himself. He was sitting in the dark and not moving, and when she stepped inside and her eyes adjusted, she could see that his hands, still bound, were pressed flat against the floor on either side of him like he was holding on to something. "Cole!" she said. 4 seconds passed. In those 4 seconds, Seravin understood something she hadn't before. She had read his file. She had catalogued his actions. She had noted the jaw compression in the throne room and filed it under controlled emotional response. She had constructed a model of Darren Cole that was accurate as far as it went. It hadn't gone far enough. "I'm here," he said finally. His voice was exactly the same as it always was, even, level, present. But it had taken 4 seconds to arrive, and she understood now what those 4 seconds contained. 11 names, 11 faces, 11 people who had been alive 10 days ago and weren't now, and whatever Cole did with that in the privacy of his own mind when no one was watching him be composed. She didn't turn the lights on. She came and sat on the floor against the opposite wall. Not close, just present, and said nothing. The silence held for a long time. Not the throne room silence, the weight of it, the weapon of it. Just 2 people in a dark room, and the low hum of a ship moving through deep space. "Ask me tomorrow," Cole said eventually. "All right," Seravin said. She stayed another 10 minutes, not speaking. Then she left. She didn't write anything in her report that night. There was nothing to write. Nothing had been said. Nothing had happened, except that something had shifted, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. She gave him access to a restricted data terminal on the 4th day. When she checked the access logs that evening, Cole had spent 4 hours reading Varek history. Not military records, not defensive installations. History. The founding of the empire, her father's reign, the political conditions that preceded her ascension. He'd cross-referenced 3 scholarly analyses of early Varek expansion policy and spent 40 minutes on a cultural anthropology text that even most Varek citizens had never read. She went to see him. "You're reading about us," she said. "You're reading about me," Cole said, not looking up from the terminal. "Seems fair. My reading serves a strategic purpose. So does mine," he turned. "You've been an empire for 800 years. You've conquered 89 civilizations. You've never lost," he paused. "But your expansion rate slowed about 60 years ago. The voluntary surrenders started increasing about 40 years ago. The last 3 major conquests were negotiated, not fought." He looked at her. "Something changed." Seravin was still. "What do you think changed?" she said carefully. "I think you got tired," Cole said. Not as an attack. The way a person states something they've observed and found sad. 300 years of winning starts to feel like something other than winning after a while, and the civilizations that surrender voluntarily now, they're not surrendering because they're afraid of you. He held her gaze. They're surrendering because the ones who fought you are gone and the ones left have read enough history to know the math. That's not fear. That's arithmetic. Fear achieves the same outcome. Does it? He moved to the viewport. The civilizations in your empire, the ones that have been there longest, do they fight for you or just not fight against you? The distinction landed precisely. "Most of them," she said slowly, "do not fight against me. There's a difference between an empire people tolerate and an empire people believe in." He turned back. "I've been trying to find the word for it in Varek standard. I don't think it exists." A pause. "In my language, we call it belonging. The belief that what you're part of is worth the cost." He looked at her steadily. "My team, all 11 of them. They weren't afraid of what would happen if they ran. They stayed because they believed in what we were doing and they believed in each other." His jaw tightened once, brief, controlled. She recognized it from the throne room, the same compression, the same weight behind it. Fear didn't keep them there. Fear would have made them run. The room was quiet. "You're not afraid of me," Seravin said. "I told you I didn't say that. You're not performing courage either. I know what that looks like." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not the careful neutrality, something older. "I'm afraid of a lot of things," he said quietly. "I'm afraid I didn't do enough for my team. I'm afraid the coalition doesn't know where we are. I'm afraid that whatever I say to you might somehow make things worse for people I haven't met yet." He held her gaze. "I'm not afraid of you, specifically." "Why not?" "Because you came to see me in the middle of the night to ask about my dead team members. Because you gave me access to your history instead of your interrogation division. Because on the 3rd night you sat on the floor in the dark and didn't say a word for 10 minutes and then left." He looked at her steadily. A person who only wanted to use fear would have taken a very different approach. Whatever you're doing, it's not only about fear, which means there's something to talk to. He paused. "And that's not scary. That's interesting." The throne room was 40 decks above them. Seravin felt the weight of every banner on its walls and found, for the first time, that the weight felt different than it used to. General Kovath came to the upper quarters on the 7th day. He didn't ask permission. He was Seravin's senior military commander, 60 years in that position, a Varek of the old structure who had built his career on the principle that conquered species were resources and sentimentality was a liability. She had known, since the night he'd waited in the corridor and she'd told him good night, that this was coming. She had known the shape of it. The formal challenge, the council backing, the law invoked with perfect correctness by someone who understood that the most effective challenges were the ones you couldn't dismiss on procedural grounds. She had known. She'd let it come anyway. By the time she arrived, Kovath had Cole standing against the far wall with 2 guards at his shoulders and was presenting what he described as a security review. In practice, it was a formal challenge, structured under Varek military law, requiring the commanding officer to respond within the hour or the challenge carried by default. The argument was clean and not without merit. A coalition intelligence operative, deep insertion trained, held in upper quarters with data terminal access, receiving nightly visits from the Queen. Either this was a strategic liability or something worse, an indication that the Queen's judgment had been compromised by whatever the human was doing that had produced this inexplicable situation. Kovath wanted Cole transferred to the cells pending formal intelligence processing. He used the word execution twice, casually, as if it were a scheduling item. Cole, against the wall with 2 guards at his shoulders, was watching Kovath with the complete undecorated attention she recognized now. Assessing, deciding what was true, waiting. He hadn't looked at her since she entered the room. He was giving her space to make a decision that was hers to make. Seravin stood in the doorway of her own ship and understood, with sudden precision, that this was the thing she hadn't had a word for. Not the standing up 3 times, not the philosophical challenges, not even the 4 seconds in the dark. This, giving someone room to be who they were without requiring anything in return. Kovath finished his formal statement and turned to her. "The law requires your response, Majesty." The room was very quiet. Seravin looked at Kovath, then at Cole, then back at Kovath, and she felt with complete clarity the nature of this moment. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. She wasn't having a transformation. She was simply looking at a situation accurately and deciding what was true. What was true was that this human, in 7 days, had asked her more useful questions than her council had in 7 years. What was true was that the thing he'd described, belonging, the belief that what you're part of is worth the cost, was what her empire had been running out of for 60 years, and she had not had the right language for it until a prisoner sat in a dark room for 4 seconds before answering a simple question. What was true was that executing him would be wrong, not politically inconvenient, not strategically wasteful. Wrong. She looked at Kovath. "Denied," she said. One word. The general opened his mouth. She held up one hand. Not threatening, not theatrical, the physical signal of a person indicating that a conversation is complete. "Denied," she said again. "Remove your guards from my quarters. File your formal objection through the council if you choose. I will read it." Kovath's face moved through several things in quick succession. He was old enough to settle on the right one. Compliance. He nodded once, sharply, and left. The guards went with him. The door sealed. Cole lowered his arms from the wall. He rolled one shoulder, checking the joint. The guards had not been gentle, and then he was still. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. It's going to cost you. Probably." He looked at her across the room. Not gratitude, something quieter and more serious. The look of someone recalibrating their understanding. "Why?" he said. Seravin considered giving him a strategic answer. She had several available. "Because it was right," she said instead. "Not because it was smart. Not because it works. Because it was right. And if I stop doing right things because they're inconvenient, I lose something I can't get back." She held his gaze. "I'm told that's how it works." She watched him recognize his own words coming back to him. His expression didn't break, but something in it settled, like something held carefully for a long time finding a surface to rest on. The observation deck was Seravin's. She'd had it built into the ship's design 30 years ago. Not for the view exactly, but for the specific quality of silence that only existed surrounded by space. No recycled air politics, no banner weight. Just stars moving slowly at transit speed, and the understanding that the universe was very large and had been doing fine without the Varek Empire for most of its existence. She went there after Kovath left. Cole found her 20 minutes later. She heard him come in and didn't turn. This had become a thing. The not turning, the arriving beside rather than in front of, the standing together at viewports watching something that neither of them had made and neither of them owned. "Your council will move formally now," he said. "Yes. Do you have enough support to hold?" "Enough." Not unanimously. She watched the stars. "Kovath isn't wrong that I've behaved unusually." "You have," Cole agreed. A pause. "What are you going to tell them?" Seravin considered it. She had been considering it since the corridor outside the upper quarters, since the word denied, since the moment she'd understood that she had chosen something and couldn't walk it back and didn't want to. That I'm asking a different question, she said finally. What question? Whether the people inside this empire believe in it. She turned to look at him. Not whether they comply, not whether they fear the consequence of leaving. Whether they believe. She paused. I don't know the answer yet. I'm not sure I've ever tried to find out. Cole was quiet for a moment. That's not a small question. No, it'll take longer than 7 days. I know. And I'll need someone who thinks differently than I do. She held his gaze. Who isn't afraid to tell me when the model has a problem. The word will, not would, not might. Cole heard it. Your coalition thinks I'm dead, he said. Yes, if I stay. The pause carried everything in it, 11 names in 4 seconds, and the specific weight of belonging to something and what it costs. I'd need to tell them otherwise. Eventually. Eventually, Seravin agreed, when there's something worth telling them. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the stars. The same stars the coalition could see from the other side. The same ancient light arriving from the same ancient sources without caring about empires or prisoners or the slow, difficult work of 2 people from different worlds trying to ask better questions. All right, Darren Cole said. Not a declaration. Not a declaration. 2 words, quiet and certain, carrying the weight of a person who means what they say and knows what it costs. Seravin looked at the stars. Outside, they moved in their ancient patterns, indifferent and vast. Inside the observation deck of the most feared ship in the Varek Empire, 2 people stood side by side, not touching, not needing to. Something that had been fixed for 300 years had begun to ask itself a different question. That was enough. For now, that was enough.